The blood on Henry VII's hands didn't come from the battlefield, it came from the nursery. While England slept under the illusion of peace, its rightful heirs were quietly hunted, imprisoned, and erased. Boys vanished, names disappeared from records, and every whisper of the Plantagenet bloodline was silenced before it could reach the throne. This isn't the tale of a war won, it's the story of a dynasty murdered in silence. Because to keep his crown, Henry VII didn't just kill his enemies, he killed the truth itself. If you believe power always hides its crimes behind glory, hit subscribe. Because here, we uncover the lies they turned into legends. And tell me in the comments, was Henry VII a savior, or the cleverest tyrant England ever crowned? The year was 1485. England was exhausted, a nation bled dry by 3 decades of civil war. Fields once green were now graves. Families no longer knew which rose to wear, red or white, only that the fighting never seemed to end. The crown had become a curse, and every man who wore it was doomed to die for it. Then, out of the chaos, rode a man few had ever heard of, Henry Tudor, the exiled son of a Welsh countess, a man with barely a drop of royal blood, now claiming destiny itself. When Henry VII defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth, it was not just a victory, it was a miracle, or so the people were told. Trumpets blared, banners rose, and England, weary of blood, accepted this quiet stranger as their king. But beneath the cheers lay doubt. His claim was thin, so thin it could tear at the first whisper of truth. His royal blood came through a line once declared illegitimate. He had not inherited the crown, he had taken it. And in the hearts of many, that meant it could still be taken back. The Tudors built their legacy on peace, but peace does not come from victory, it comes from silence. Henry VII understood this better than anyone. He looked at the throne not as a seat of honor, but as a fortress that had to be defended against ghosts. Because while he wore the crown, the shadows of the true heirs still lingered. Boys and men with purer blood, stronger claims, and the dangerous gift of birthright. The war might have ended on the battlefield, but in Henry's mind, it had only just begun. From the first day of his reign, paranoia sat beside him like an advisor. Every banquet, every wedding, every council meeting carried a whisper of Yorkist rebellion. Henry's marriage to Elizabeth of York, daughter of Edward IV, was meant to unite the red and white roses, to heal the kingdom's wounds. But even that union was a political calculation, not a romantic bond. To the people, it was a symbol of peace. To Henry, it was insurance. By marrying her, he tried to turn his enemy's bloodline into his own. Yet deep inside, he knew he had only caged the storm, not calmed it. In the court, loyalty was measured by fear. Old Yorkist nobles watched in silence as their lands were seized and their sons branded as threats. Henry VII introduced financial bonds, clever legal traps that ruined families for the slightest suspicion of disloyalty. It wasn't just punishment, it was control through debt. And behind the polite smiles of the Tudor court, terror had a new name: your loyalty is under question. But what haunted Henry the most was not the living, it was the missing. The princes in the Tower, Edward V and his brother Richard, had vanished under Richard III's rule. No one knew if they had died or if they still lived in hiding. Their blood, if it still flowed, was royal enough to destroy everything Henry had built. Rumors spread like wildfire. A boy seen in Flanders, another in Ireland, all claiming to be a lost prince. Each rumor was a dagger pointed at the crown. And for Henry VII, rumor was as deadly as rebellion. He responded not with open war, but with quiet calculation. Spies were planted across Europe. Informers filled the taverns. Letters were intercepted before they left the kingdom. Henry didn't just want to know his enemies, he wanted to control their stories. The War of Swords had ended, but the War of Perception had begun. Henry became England's first modern political manipulator, rewriting truth faster than his rivals could speak it. To the people, he was Henry the Peacemaker. To those who knew him, he was Henry the Watchful. He spoke softly, but his eyes missed nothing. His reign promised order but demanded obedience. And soon, that obedience would be tested by 2 boys, both pretending to be princes, both used as pawns by powers greater than themselves. One would be shown mercy in public humiliation. The other would die for claiming the truth. But that's the irony of power. It fears imitation more than opposition. Henry VII believed he was defending peace. In reality, he was building a cage so strong it would trap his own legacy for generations. The roses had stopped bleeding, but England's heart had not healed. The War of the Roses had ended, yet in the dark halls of the Tudor court, a new kind of war was about to begin. A war fought not with swords, but with secrets. Peace, they said, had returned to England. But peace built on fear is only a quieter kind of war. Henry VII wore his crown with a calm face, yet behind every decision there was tension, the kind that makes even silence feel dangerous. The Tudor throne wasn't solid, it was standing on the bones of a broken dynasty, and in the shadows of his reign, the ghosts of York were beginning to stir. The House of York, the White Rose, had ruled with bloodline certainty. Its roots ran deep, through kings, dukes, and princes whose lineage was undeniable. But Henry VII? His claim was thinner than parchment. He was the son of Margaret Beaufort, descendant of a once illegitimate branch of the royal line. His right to rule came not from birth, but from battle and marriage, and both could be undone. To legitimize himself, Henry did what every clever ruler must. He turned his enemies into family. His marriage to Elizabeth of York, eldest daughter of Edward IV, was more than symbolic. It was strategic perfection. It united red and white, Tudor and York, conqueror and conquered. To the people, it was a new beginning. To Henry, it was an act of containment. By marrying the daughter of York, he didn't just unite the Roses, he absorbed the threat they represented. But a crown gained through compromise cannot silence blood. The true heirs still existed, young men of the Plantagenet line, nephews and cousins of Elizabeth, who carried the blood of Edward III without stain. Among them, one name terrified Henry above all others: Edward, Earl of Warwick, the only surviving son of George, Duke of Clarence, brother to Edward IV. By pure lineage, Warwick had a stronger claim to the throne than Henry himself. So Henry did what insecure rulers always do. He hid his fear behind justice. Warwick, only 10 years old, was dragged to the Tower of London, where he would spend nearly all his life behind stone walls. His only crime was being born royal. Henry never needed to prove Warwick's guilt. His existence was proof enough. Still, even locked away, Warwick's presence haunted Henry. To the public, the boy became a rumor, a whisper that the rightful heir still lived. And in the taverns and courts across England, Yorkist loyalists began to dream again. The Wars of the Roses might have ended, but in secret, Yorkist hope was still alive. And abroad, it was being fueled by someone who hated Henry more than any man in England ever could: Margaret of Burgundy, sister of Edward IV. Margaret had power, wealth, and revenge in her heart. From her court in Flanders, she became the financier of rebellion, the shadow behind every uprising that threatened Henry's crown. She poured gold into conspiracies, trained impostors, and whispered Yorkist names to foreign kings. It wasn't about restoring England's peace. It was about vengeance for her murdered family. And Henry VII knew that as long as Margaret lived, the ghosts of York would never rest. Then came a story so audacious it nearly destroyed the Tudor crown, the tale of a boy who claimed to be Edward, Earl of Warwick himself. His name was Lambert Simnel. Young, well-spoken, trained by priests, and eerily convincing, he was presented to the world as the true heir, the child Henry had supposedly locked away. Whether Lambert believed his own lie or not didn't matter. The Yorkists did. Margaret of Burgundy recognized him, financed him, and sent him to Ireland to be crowned King Edward VI. Henry VII didn't panic, he planned. He knew that crushing rebellion wasn't enough. He had to humiliate it. As Simnel's small army marched into England, Henry prepared his own trap. He spread propaganda that painted the rebels as fools chasing a ghost. Then, at Stoke Field, he destroyed them. Simnel was captured alive, and his defeat should have been the end. But Henry turned it into a masterstroke of psychological warfare. Instead of executing the boy, he spared him. Publicly, he paraded him as a servant in the royal kitchens, feeding the man he once claimed to replace. It was an act of mercy wrapped in mockery. The message was clear: challenge me, and I will not only defeat you, I will make you serve me. To the common people, it looked like compassion. To the nobles, it was terror disguised as mercy. And to Margaret of Burgundy, it was humiliation. But Henry's paranoia didn't fade. If one boy could be turned into a prince, another could be too. The world had seen how easy it was to believe. The illusion of royal blood had power, and it could destroy him again. The tragedy of Edward, Earl of Warwick, was not that he was forgotten, it was that he was used. His name became a weapon for others, his bloodline a banner for rebellion. And for Henry VII, every rumor of his survival became a reminder that he would never truly be safe. So Henry doubled down. He tightened control over his court, built a network of informers, and turned suspicion into a political system. The Tudor peace began to resemble a kingdom under surveillance. Every letter was a potential betrayal, every alliance a possible plot. Even his marriage to Elizabeth began to strain under the weight of his fear. Because the truth is, Henry didn't just inherit a throne, he inherited a curse. The curse of kings who rise by conquest, the eternal fear that someone more rightful waits in the dark. And as the years went by, another name began to echo through Europe, one that would test Henry's iron grip on the crown more than any army ever could. A man who called himself Richard of Shrewsbury, the second lost prince, the boy who should have been king. In the spring of 1487, England awoke to a rumor that spread faster than truth. The rightful heir to the throne had returned. A boy named Lambert Simnel, barely old enough to shave, was being hailed as Edward, Earl of Warwick, the lost prince imprisoned by Henry VII. To a weary nation, it was the spark of hope. To Henry, it was déjà vu, another ghost rising from the ashes of York. But this time, the threat didn't come from England's soil. It came from across the sea, from a court that refused to let the White Rose die. In Flanders, Margaret of Burgundy, sister of Edward IV and aunt to the real Warwick, became the mastermind of this deception. She took the boy under her protection, clothed him in royal colors, and taught him how to move, speak, and behave like a prince. He wasn't born of royal blood, but he was trained to wear it like armor. Margaret's goal wasn't to restore the throne, it was to humiliate Henry VII. Every letter she sent, every coin she spent, was an act of vengeance for her slain brothers and vanished nephews. She wanted to make the Tudor king chase shadows until paranoia consumed him. And in the boy Simnel, she found her perfect shadow. Ireland, ever loyal to the Yorkist cause, became the stage for this royal performance. The Irish lords, still mourning the fall of the Plantagenets, declared Simnel their rightful king. In Dublin, they crowned him with a makeshift diadem, a crown taken from a statue of the Virgin Mary. To the Irish rebels, it was holy justice. To Henry VII, it was mockery on sacred ground. Henry's spies moved fast. Within weeks, the truth reached his council. The so-called prince was nothing more than a baker's son. But Henry understood something deeper. Truth didn't matter. In a kingdom ruled by rumor, perception was power. If enough people believed the lie, it became a weapon sharper than any sword. So he didn't laugh. He prepared for war. As Simnel and his rebel army, led by the experienced Yorkist commander John de la Pole, landed in the north, Henry VII read the situation like a chessboard. He let them advance just far enough to feel powerful, then cut off their supply lines, surrounded their allies, and forced them into open battle at Stoke Field. The fight was brutal, but brief. The Yorkists fell, and with them, their puppet king's short-lived glory. Lambert Simnel was captured alive. The rebellion was crushed, and England waited for the spectacle, the hanging of another pretender. But what Henry did next stunned everyone. He didn't execute Simnel. He didn't imprison him. He spared him. The boy was brought before the court, trembling, his crown gone, his voice barely audible. Henry looked at him, this false prince who had almost torn his kingdom apart, and smiled. Mercy, when displayed by power, is not always compassion. Sometimes it's a message. Henry pardoned Simnel publicly, declaring him a poor, misguided child. Then he ordered the boy to serve in the royal kitchens, polishing silver and pouring wine for the very man he had once impersonated. It was genius and cruelty intertwined. Imagine it, the boy walking the grand halls of the palace, carrying dishes past nobles who once called him Your Majesty. Every glance, every whisper, a reminder of his fall from illusion to servitude. Henry didn't just defeat his enemy, he reduced him to proof of what happens to those who challenge the Tudors. The people saw mercy, the nobles saw domination. In one move, Henry VII transformed rebellion into theater, a public demonstration that he controlled not just the throne, but the narrative. The message spread across Europe: challenge Henry, and he will not only destroy you, he will make you kneel. But behind that calculated mercy was fear. The rebellion had revealed something Henry couldn't ignore: that belief could be manufactured, that loyalty could shift with a rumor. If one false heir could nearly bring down the crown, how many more could follow? And Margaret of Burgundy wasn't finished. Her letters continued to circulate. Her spies whispered of another survivor, a boy, older this time, who looked exactly like Richard of Shrewsbury, the younger of the lost princes in the Tower. A boy who spoke with the voice of royalty, remembered the secrets of the royal court, and bore the calm confidence of someone who truly believed he was born to rule. Henry VII had survived Simnel's farce. But the next pretender wouldn't be a puppet, he would be a mirror, reflecting Henry's deepest fear that his throne, his peace, his dynasty were all built on a lie. And soon, the world would meet him. His name was Perkin Warbeck. When the rumors began, even Henry VII didn't believe them. A whisper in Flanders. A boy, confident and well-spoken, claiming to be Richard of Shrewsbury, the younger of the missing princes in the Tower. Another impostor, perhaps, another Simnel. But this time, the story felt different. This boy didn't just act like a prince. He remembered like one. He recalled private court details, the mannerisms of Edward IV, the way his mother, Queen Elizabeth Woodville, arranged her jewels. He spoke of rooms in the royal palace that no servant would have known. And above all, he carried himself not like a desperate rebel, but like a man returning home to what was rightfully his. His name was Perkin Warbeck, though few would call him that for long. To his followers he was Richard IV, the lost prince come to reclaim the throne stolen from his family. And to Henry VII he was not just a pretender, he was the living embodiment of a lie that could ruin everything. Unlike Lambert Simnel, Warbeck wasn't the puppet of others. He was the performance itself, charismatic, intelligent, fluent in several languages, and able to command loyalty with a single glance. He found allies not in desperate rebels, but in kings. Charles VIII of France, James IV of Scotland, and, of course, Margaret of Burgundy, who recognized him instantly as her nephew. Whether she believed him or not didn't matter. She saw in him a weapon, the most dangerous kind, one that believed in its own myth. Henry's spies brought him reports. The prince was welcomed at courts, hosted like royalty, funded like a future king. France paraded him as a symbol of legitimacy. Scotland treated him as family. Even Rome listened to whispers that the lost prince had returned. The illusion was so complete that, for the first time, even Henry's own subjects began to wonder. If this man truly was the prince, then what did that make Henry? Warbeck's greatest strength wasn't his sword, it was his story. He mastered the art of propaganda centuries before the term existed. Every letter he sent began with royal grace. Every word dripped with the quiet certainty of someone wronged. His handwriting mimicked royal correspondence. His seal bore the white rose of York, and wherever he went, the people bowed. Henry VII, the master manipulator of narrative, had finally met his match. He responded not with rage, but with strategy. He knew killing the pretender would only make him a martyr. Instead, he sought to cut off his support, to isolate him until even his allies began to doubt his reality. Through cunning diplomacy, Henry bought peace with France, forcing them to abandon Warbeck. Then he pressured Burgundy through trade bans, choking their economy until Margaret's court became a liability. One by one, the boy's royal backers turned away, leaving him adrift. But Henry's brilliance came with a cost. Paranoia became his shadow. He saw conspiracies everywhere, even among his friends. Several English nobles were executed or imprisoned for corresponding with Warbeck, including the once loyal Sir William Stanley, the very man who had saved Henry at Bosworth. Trust was dead. Only suspicion remained. Still, Warbeck was not finished. He fled to Scotland, where King James IV embraced him as a brother and even arranged his marriage to a noblewoman, Lady Catherine Gordon, a gesture that gave his claim new life. Together, they planned an invasion. But fate had other plans. The attack failed. His forces scattered. The illusion began to crack. In 1497, desperate and abandoned, Warbeck landed in Cornwall, where rebellion still simmered from heavy taxation. He declared himself King Richard IV once more, hoping to rally the commoners. But England had grown weary of false kings. His army dwindled. his men deserted, and soon he was surrounded by Henry's soldiers. When captured, Warbeck expected the executioner's block. Instead, Henry smiled. Again, he knew killing this man outright would only feed the legend. So, he humiliated him instead. The once proud prince was paraded through London in chains, forced to confess publicly that he was not Richard, but Perkin Warbeck, the son of a merchant from Tournai. Yet those who heard the confession whispered privately, he didn't sound like a liar. Henry locked him in the Tower, the same prison where the real princes had vanished years before. It was poetic justice, or perhaps poetic irony. Warbeck tried to escape, failed, and was finally executed in 1499. His last words were calm, dignified, almost royal. Even as the rope tightened, he didn't beg. He simply said he died for a name that had once belonged to him. Henry had won, or so it seemed. But deep inside, he knew something had changed. Perkin Warbeck had done what no army could. He made the world doubt the Tudor crown. He showed that identity could be manufactured, that stories could rival bloodlines, and that the throne itself could be built on illusion. Henry had crushed a man, but not the myth. And as he walked the echoing halls of his palace, Henry VII must have felt the weight of his victory. For every pretender he destroyed, another shadow took form. Every truth he silenced became a whisper in the dark. He had silenced Warbeck. But he could never silence the question, what if the boy had been real? By the time Perkin Warbeck's body swung lifeless from the gallows, Henry VII might have believed the ghosts were finally gone. The pretenders were silenced, the rebellions crushed, the crown at last secure. But the truth is, power never sleeps easily, especially when it's borrowed. And deep in England's noble bloodlines, one family still lived, one with a claim strong enough to burn everything Henry had built. They were called the De la Poles, the last surviving branch of the House of York. Their blood traced directly to George, Duke of Clarence, brother of both Edward IV and Richard III. Clarence had been executed years before by his own brother, drowned in a barrel of wine, a death that became legend. But his children lived, and through them flowed the purest Plantagenet blood left in England. To Henry VII, that made them not just rivals, it made them threats to existence. At the head of this doomed family stood John de la Pole, Earl of Lincoln, nephew to Edward IV. He had once been favored by Richard III as a possible heir, a fact that made him dangerous the moment Henry claimed the throne. After Bosworth, Lincoln pretended loyalty, attended Henry's court, even stood beside him in ceremonies. But loyalty to a usurper is a fragile mask, and Lincoln's cracked quickly. When Lambert Simnel's rebellion rose, Lincoln didn't just support it, he led it. He died on the battlefield at Stokefield, and his death should have ended the threat. But Henry knew that bloodlines have long shadows. Lincoln's brothers, Edmund, Richard, and William de la Pole, still lived. 3 men, each with royal lineage, Yorkist pride, and reason to hate the Tudors. At first, Henry tried patience. He allowed them positions at court, small titles, and gestures of peace. It was not mercy, it was surveillance. He believed keeping them close would keep them harmless. But Edmund, proud and ambitious, refused to fade into the background. He carried himself like a man born for more, and in the Tudor world, confidence was the first sign of treason. Henry's spies began collecting whispers, coded letters, secret meetings, noble sympathizers abroad. Whether they were real or imagined no longer mattered. Henry had learned from the ghosts of Simnel and Warbeck it was better to kill a rumor than to let it breathe. So he moved silently, dismantling the de la Pole influence piece by piece. Edmund fled England in fear of his life, seeking refuge under the protection of Emperor Maximilian of the Holy Roman Empire. To Henry, this was confirmation, guilt by distance. The king demanded his extradition. When Maximilian refused, Henry retaliated the way only he could, through money and leverage. He used trade, diplomacy, and blackmail to isolate the exiled Yorkists until even the emperor saw more value in surrender than in honor. Eventually, Edmund was handed over to the Tudor crown. He was locked in the Tower of London like so many of Henry's rivals before him. For years, he sat there, a quiet reminder that Yorkist blood still existed, breathing, waiting, haunting. But Henry VII wasn't content with waiting. His paranoia had evolved into policy. He began reshaping England's nobility, draining old families of wealth, dismantling alliances, and replacing legacy with loyalty. The Tudor state became a machine built on fear, loyalty bought with debt, and truth rewritten through law. The final chapter of the De la Poles came not in Henry VII's time, but under his son, Henry VIII. When the old king died, he left behind a secure throne and a list of enemies. Among them was Edmund de la Pole, still imprisoned in the Tower. Henry VIII, young and eager to assert his strength, saw the imprisoned Yorkist as an unfinished task, a loose thread that needed cutting. In 1513, without trial or warning, Edmund de la Pole was executed quietly. His death marked the symbolic end of the Plantagenet male line. Only one brother remained, Richard de la Pole, exiled in France. Known as the White Rose, he became a rallying symbol for the last few Yorkist loyalists. He fought bravely in foreign wars, still dreaming of reclaiming England, but his fate was sealed at the Battle of Pavia in 1525, where he was killed in combat, far from home. And with that, the Plantagenet line, once the mightiest dynasty in Europe, was gone. Henry VII had done what war, rebellion, and betrayal could not. He had erased a bloodline without ever calling it murder. No dramatic execution, no public beheading of princes. Just quiet disappearances, forgotten names, and rewritten records. The last true heirs were not defeated on the battlefield, they were outlived. And as Henry's court chroniclers put their quills to parchment, they crafted the version of history that would survive, the tale of a wise, just king who brought peace to England. But beneath that polished narrative, buried under layers of propaganda and fear, was the truth that peace had been purchased with bloodlines. The house of de la Pole was gone, the Plantagenet sun had set, and the Tudor dawn, bright, golden, and deceptive, now ruled unchallenged. When Richard de la Pole fell on the battlefield in 1525, the world didn't even pause to notice. There were no songs, no banners, no mourning bells. A line of kings, once destined to rule England for centuries, had ended quietly in a foreign field. And that was exactly how Henry VII had planned it. But this chapter isn't about swords or executions. It's about something colder, smarter, more permanent. Because Henry VII didn't just destroy the York bloodline, he destroyed their story. The war that began with roses ended with the pen. In the years after crushing the De la Poles, Henry VII turned his obsession from people to perception. He knew that blood could be spilled, but truth could be reshaped. What he couldn't erase from the world, he would rewrite. And so began the first great political propaganda campaign in English history, a quiet rewriting of reality itself. He started with the Chronicles, the official histories of England, commissioned and controlled by the Crown. Men who once served under Yorkist kings suddenly found themselves riding under Tudor rule. Their quills trembled with fear, but they wrote what they were told. The Plantagenets became villains, reckless, bloody, doomed by their own arrogance. Henry VII became the chosen savior, the man who brought peace, unity, and divine justice. Every chronicler knew the rules: praise the Tudors, forget the rest. Henry understood something dangerous, that the memory of power is more lasting than power itself, so he rewrote that memory at its roots. Portraits were repainted, family trees adjusted. Even church sermons began echoing the new story that the Tudors were God's answer to England's suffering. The people began to repeat it, not out of belief, but because no one dared to disagree. Soon, the myth became truth. The Tudor rose, a perfect blend of red and white, was printed on coins, sewn into banners, carved into stone. It symbolized unity, but it also buried the past beneath it. In Henry's England, history was not something to be remembered, it was something to be edited. He replaced Yorkist sheriffs, judges, and bishops with loyalists bound by debt or favor. He built the Star Chamber, a secret court that could try nobles without a jury, an early tool of psychological control disguised as justice. Behind every act of mercy lay manipulation, behind every law, fear. And perhaps the cruelest twist of all, Henry didn't burn books, he replaced them. He created a world where lies didn't need to be enforced. They were simply the only story left. It worked. Within a generation, the memory of the true heirs faded from the common tongue. Children grew up believing that Henry Tudor was destined to rule, that the Wars of the Roses were the price of peace, and that his victory had been a divine correction of chaos. The real tragedy wasn't that the Plantagenets were dead, it was that they were forgotten. And yet, for all his control, Henry VII couldn't rewrite his own reflection. He grew more reclusive, consumed by guilt and suspicion. His court became quieter, colder. His son, Prince Henry, watched in silence as his father's paranoia deepened. The boy learned an important lesson, that fear is power, and power is survival. When Henry VII died in 1509, England wept because it had been told to. But the man who took his place, Henry VIII, would take his father's manipulation to monstrous new heights. Still, history remembers Henry VII as the king who ended the wars, unified the realm, and built stability from ruin. And perhaps, in a twisted way, that's true. But the cost was enormous. A bloodline erased, a history rewritten, a kingdom built not on truth but on control. And centuries later, historians still debate, was Henry VII a savior who restored order or a tyrant who silenced every rival to create the illusion of peace? Perhaps both, because that's the genius of manipulation. When done perfectly, no one can tell where truth ends and power begins. When Henry VII died in 1509, England mourned the man it was told had saved it. Bells rang. Priests spoke of peace. The chronicles praised his wisdom. But beneath the polished marble of his tomb lay something far colder, the truth of what he had created. He had built an empire not on trust, but on fear. Every brick of the Tudor dynasty was held together by silence, the silence of those who dared not question how the crown had been won. His peace was real, yes, but it was the peace of exhaustion. A nation too tired to fight, too afraid to remember. In the candlelight of the royal chapel, as courtiers whispered prayers for his soul, one man stood apart, his son, Prince Henry. Young, golden, ambitious, the heir to the first truly stable throne in generations. But what he inherited wasn't just a kingdom, it was a blueprint for control. Henry VIII learned from his father's quiet cruelty. Where the father ruled through suspicion, the son ruled through spectacle. Where Henry VII erased bloodlines with ink, Henry VIII would erase them with fire and steel. The father had built the cage, the son learned to decorate it. Together, they forged a dynasty that would define power for centuries. But history, as it always does, remembers the cost. Henry VII's obsession with security made England rich, but also paranoid. His endless bonds and fines crippled the nobility. His manipulation of truth made loyalty meaningless. Even the peace he created came with a hidden poison, a fear so deep it survived long after him. Every Tudor who followed carried that same shadow. Henry VIII's tyranny, Mary's terror, Elizabeth's distrust, all of it born from the same seed, a legacy planted by a king who thought fear could be peace. And yet, that's what makes Henry VII so fascinating. He wasn't a monster, he was a survivor, a man who knew what chaos looked like and vowed never to let it return. He didn't crave cruelty for pleasure, but for control. To him, morality was a luxury. Power was survival, and survival, he believed, justified everything. Centuries later, we still live with his lesson. That history isn't written by heroes or villains. It's written by those who win and those who make us believe they deserve to. Henry didn't just defeat his rivals, he made their erasure seem righteous. He didn't silence truth with swords, he smothered it with narrative. That is the real genius and the real danger of power. Because what Henry VII left behind was more than a dynasty. He left a method, the manipulation of story, the control of image, the rewriting of history as propaganda. Techniques now used not by kings, but by leaders, corporations, and media across the modern world. 5 centuries later, his crown may be gone, but his strategy still rules us. We remember him as the man who ended war, but in doing so, he taught the world a darker lesson, that peace built on fear is just war in disguise. So, when we speak of Henry VII, we must ask, not what he did to his enemies, but what he did to truth itself. Because that, more than anything, was his final victory. He silenced every rival, erased every name, and reshaped the past to suit his crown. 500 years later, his dynasty has faded, but his tactics haven't. Power doesn't die, it adapts. If you believe history's greatest lies weren't written in books, but whispered by kings, hit subscribe. because here we uncover the truths they buried in plain sight.